Okay, so hi guys, good evening. This is Dr. Jeff Horowitz. Going to have a great Viva learning session with you. Going to do about 45 minutes of lecture, and we'll do some Q&A following that. And tonight we're going to talk about increasing positive outcomes with milled restorative techniques. This is a big part of what I do every day in practice. And we use our CEREC milling unit and our OmniCam. We use it as hard as you can use any piece of equipment. And you don't have to have a CEREC. You certainly can be you can be using any scanning technology. You can be using any type of milling technology. And even if you don't want to get involved in milling technology, you can be scanning and sending these to the lab, or even taking impressions and sending these off to the lab. So let's get into this, and let's start talking about a new generation of restorative dentistry. So just a little bit of background on myself. I know many of you have heard me speak before. The picture that you see there is myself and my 3 associates. I have a dental practice in the Myrtle Beach area of South Carolina. We have 2 locations, one in Conway and one in Murrells Inlet, which is at the south end of the beach. South Carolina is a beautiful place to live, but if you know anything about being here this time of year, you know that the pollen is a major issue, and so I hope you'll forgive me. My voice is not at its peak, as the pollen is definitely taking its toll. But every area has its drawbacks, right? So this is everything about myself that you'll see here. I'm not going to go into detail on this other than I am a graduate from the Medical University of South Carolina in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina. Did a 1-year GPR and thereafter opened my practice in Conway, South Carolina. I am a mentor and scientific advisor out at the Coy Center. And I am an active member of Catapult Education as well as Sleep Group Solutions. This is my email address that you see down here. Feel free at any time after the course, if you have any questions or want to make any kind of correspondence, absolutely open to that. Feel free to email me at any time. So as I said, I am a member of Catapult Education. We are a group of key opinion leaders that test many products that come to the marketplace, and we offer valuable feedback to the companies that make these products. So we get to test a lot of these products before they ever hit market. We help them develop these products. We put tweaks on them. We try to speak on behalf of what most general dentists are looking for. And the companies are generally very receptive to our feedback. You've probably heard many of these other speakers before that you see in the photographs here. And this year we are very excited to be starting Catapult Live, which is a live symposia and a live continuum that's going to be held in Nashville and in San Diego. So keep your eyes open for that. As you'll probably be getting some information on that in the near future. Of course, we have to do some disclosure, and as a member of the Catapult Group, we are constantly participating in product reviews. We do this so that we can stay at the forefront of the latest materials and techniques, and we want to make sure that what we're delivering to you is the most current and the most relevant to what the educational needs are for today. So some of the products I'm going to be talking about today, and in fact sometimes companies that we will do product reviews for, when we offer a favorable review, will offer to sponsor us for lectures like this. And in the case of today, Voco America has kindly offered to sponsor this, and so thank you to Voco America, as well as to Viva Learning. I will tell you that we will never, none of the Catapult Education key opinion leaders will ever speak about a product that they do not use within their own practice, do not purchase on their own, and do not wholeheartedly believe in. So anything that I talk to you about today is something that I use every day in practice. And again, if you have any questions about sources, about literature, about scientific backing of anything that I say, please feel free to reach out to me or offer any questions at the bottom of the page. So you see beautiful Augusta National down there on the lower right. The Masters is getting ready to happen. That the only way that those beautiful azaleas come to be is with all the pollen that's in the air now. So again, last request for you to bear with me with my voice tonight, but I'm going to do the best that I can for you. In tonight's webinar, we're going to talk about the decision-making process for when it's best to do a direct restoration versus doing an indirect restoration. And I really do have pretty specific criteria for when I choose to do either one of these. We're also going to talk about the rationale for material selection when we do decide to go with an indirect restoration. We'll talk a little bit about the preparation recommendations for the milled restoratives that we're going to be discussing this evening. And we'll talk a little bit about the adhesive strategies when we're implementing this type of dentistry. So before we get started, I'm going to show you this quick little video. Two of my Catapult Education cronies, Dr. Ron Kaminer and Dr. Lou Graham, actually did a live presentation at the Greater New York Dental Meeting this year where they performed a live onlay, an onlay procedure on a live patient in front of about 300 or 400 colleagues, and so everyone got to see in real time how this works, and they had asked me to make a small video for them, so I'm going to share that with you real quickly.
Hey, I'm Dr. Jeff Horowitz. I'm a huge fan of the Grandio Block by Voco. We get all the advantages of a resin with the polishability of a ceramic, and so these are very forgiving restorations. We use them for onlays, we use them for full crowns, we can even use them over implants. Since there's no firing, we can do a lot of these in a pretty short amount of time.
All right, so yeah, just a little video that I had done for them that kind of shows you everything that we're going to be talking about tonight, showing you the processes that we go through. As you saw, that was a full crown that we did, and there are a lot of indications for using the Grandio Block by Voco. We will use it for crowns, we will use it for onlays, we will use it over implants, and we'll even use it for bite opening cases. So we'll get into all that tonight. But first, let's talk about how you make the decision on whether to do a large direct resin or go to an onlay procedure. Let's talk first about some of the problems that are associated with large direct resins. And we know that these affect all of us. We know that the outcomes for large direct resins are not as ideal as we would like them to be in dentistry, because it never fails that I'm talking about doing onlays in front of an audience, and someone will say, why would you not just do a composite there and save the patient a lot of money? And the truth is, yes, you could save them a lot of money, but will they be back in the chair sooner? And what happens to the tooth when recurrent decay sets in? Did we actually end up saving them money? So there are several things that can happen when we place a large direct resin. One of the biggest concerns is certainly microleakage. We have shrinkage issues that occur when, and shrinkage stress that occur when we use light-cured materials, and in particular some of the bulk fill materials that have higher shrinkage coefficients. We know that there are issues with incomplete curing of the resin material, and certainly we know that these can take a lot of time to do, and certainly you have to consider whether or not the reimbursement is worth the amount of time that it takes to perform a given procedure. And then finally, we also have to think about the structural compromise to the teeth. And so any of these 5 things that you see here, they all have an impact on recurrent decay. And we know currently that the recurrent decay, the amount of recurrent decay that we see with large composites is definitely greater than what we had hoped to see, and certainly greater than what we are seeing now with regard to indirect restorations that are adhesively placed. So let's talk about each of these things one at a time. Microleakage is just a matter of a dynamic microenvironment, micro crevices, where there is busy traffic with bacteria, ions, and molecules passing back and forth. We know that the wider the marginal gap is, that the more likely we will have microleakage, and the higher the incidence of recurrent decay will be. We do dye penetration tests to test for microleakage, and we know that if techniques are not absolutely perfect with direct composites, then the marginal gaps are higher, and so too is the amount of microleakage. Shrinkage and polymerization shrinkage stress, a very complex phenomenon, but we know it has a lot to do with the light source, the power of the light, the heat from the light, the material itself. We know that some materials are much more bound to show polymerization shrinkage in a given situation than other materials are. Materials can shrink anywhere from 1 to 6%, and again, this can create a large marginal gap leading to microleakage and again recurrent decay. We know incomplete curing is an issue. Holding the light too far away from the tooth, holding the light at a poor angle, not allowing the light to penetrate all the way down into the proximal box, not allowing correct angulation of the light so that a portion of the resin is never even hit with the light that might be in the proximal box. This has long been an issue with direct resins, and many people don't test their curing lights, and certainly many people are not paying close attention to the positioning of the light, and very often we actually exceed the manufacturer's directions for allowable curing depths, and when that happens, we absolutely are compromising the composites that we're placing. So Dr. Richard Price actually put a paper forth where he described the core variables in light curing. And what these have to do with are the different variables that exist with light curing and where it's possible to fall short. So the curing light itself, are you testing the output? How much heat is the light putting off? Is it a ramped? How many bulbs? What is the size of the head of the curing light? So a lot has to do with the equipment itself. Then the operator's technique. If we don't have a shield that shields the blue light, Are we looking away to where our hand can be moving? Maybe we're moving further away from the teeth. Are we following the guidelines for the specific restoration that we're using? And then what is the particular energy requirement of the composite resin that we're using? Now, as we talk about all of these different phenomena, then what happens is we end up with recurrent decay. And as I said, recurrent decay is a common problem with large composite restorations. And we have to be very, very careful about that. So with that, I want to talk about this last point about how do we make the decision between a direct resin composite and going to some type of an indirect restoration. And this is a very, very important paper. This paper was done by Dr. Larson and Douglas, and the title of it is The Effect of Prepared Cavities on the Strength of Teeth. This is not a new study. This study goes all the way back to 1981, and what it describes is how much cuspal flexure there is in any type of given cavity preparation. So if you look at my cursor here, if you look at the width of the preparation that needs to be made, if the preparation exceeds more than 1/3 of the buccolingual cusp width, so the buccolingual cusp distance, if the isthmus exceeds more than 1/3 of that, then it takes half of the amount of force to create a fracture, to stress the cusp enough to where it will fracture. Now, that does not matter if it's an occlusal or if it's an MOD. We don't have to break proximal contact. It doesn't matter occlusal or MOD or DO or MO. Once that distance exceeds more than 1/3 of the buccolingual cusp width, we know that it takes half of the amount of force to fracture the tooth. So what do we do at that point? That's a point at which we're going to consider going to an indirect restoration and covering at least the functional cusp, meaning on the upper teeth, the lingual cusp, and on the lower teeth, the buccal cusps, if they're in a normal occlusal relationship. Even at 1/4 of the buccolingual width, we still see a dramatic decrease in the amount of load needed to exert enough force to create a fracture or to create enough cuspal flexure to create a fracture within the tooth. Again, it does not matter if it is a bonded or unbonded restoration. It still reduces the amount of force needed to fracture the tooth. So I want you to consider that any time that buccolingual isthmus width exceeds more than 1/3 of the intercuspal distance, I want you to talk to your patients and say, look, I'm happy to put a filling in if that's all that you can do, but just know you are more likely to fracture your tooth and you are more likely to be sitting in this chair sooner. At the end of the day, the way we discuss things with our patients is on a risk basis. I was taught this by Dr. John Coyce, and the only thing we have to say to patients is, my job is to keep you out of my chair, and the best way for me to keep you out of my chair is for us to do an indirect restoration on the tooth. And it's amazing how many people will actually go forth with the recommended treatment as opposed to just having the filling. So you want to add to your bottom line, just start talking to patients on the basis of risk and use the literature. Use scientific data to back up what you're saying. So let's start talking about some of the indirect aesthetic milled materials. Obviously, there are other materials that are available for milling in the office or in the laboratory. Certainly, we could be milling metals like titanium. There are even companies that have made gold efficient to mill at this point. But for the sake of this conversation and for brevity, we're just going to be discussing some of the aesthetic milled materials and how we make the decision on when to use each of these. So let's talk about, there are 4 basic categories of indirect aesthetic materials for milling. There are actually some others, but the others like PMMA and acrylics really are meant more for temporary restoration. So these are the materials meant more for permanent restoration. So the first category are the glass-based ceramics, and we have in that group milled lithium disilicate, or EMAX, as an example. The feldspathic porcelains like Vita Mark II, one of the first materials we were using for our CEREC, and then certainly the lucite reinforced ceramics like Empress. They're very beautiful materials. They do have a drawback to them in that they can be very prone to fracture, certainly when margins get thin. The thinner these materials are, the higher the requirement that they be bonded. And also, most of these materials will require some other type of secondary heating, meaning if you're making EMAX in the office, you have to put it into crystallization. And even for feldspathic porcelain, a lot of times we're still going to put it back into an oven for glazing after we finish the restoration. Then there are the composite resin blocks like 3M's Paradigm, and again, these are examples of the different materials that are out there. There was a point where we were using a lot of composite resin. We weren't getting quite the bonding that we were hoping to get, or that we were getting with some of the ceramic materials that were out there. We also weren't seeing quite the strength that we were hoping to see, that we were seeing, say, with the EMAX materials that were bonded into place. We also had zirconia materials now available for milling. Very, very strong, obviously, sometimes too strong, sometimes can be abrasive. Have to spend a lot of time on polishing. That does require going into a sintering oven, so they can be very time consuming, and aesthetics can certainly be of concern. Going back to the composite resin, we don't get that luster that we would get when we were looking at some of the glass-based ceramics. And just as in composite resin, zirconia, even though there are some prettier materials like katana, we still are not getting the kind of aesthetic results that we are with ceramics. And from this next category, called the ceramic resin hybrids, and namely we're going to be talking about Voco's Grandio block, and I'll talk to you about that category of materials here in just a second. So again, the glass-based ceramics, just as a review, we have EMAX or lithium disilicate, we have lithium silicate, we have feldspathic porcelain like Vita Mark II, we have lucite reinforced ceramic like Empress, all available for milling. Again, most of these did require going into a secondary oven, and when thinner we would see some chipping and breaking, and certainly not holding up as well as a lot of the other materials that we're using now. In the resins, again, like Paradigm, low luster, lower strength. So really we started using these mostly for temporary type restorations and for inlay restorations in the posterior, but not using a whole lot of these pure composite resin materials. Zirconia, a wonderful material for full crowns. Difficulty with bonding, obviously. Aesthetics, not as great as we would hope, especially compared to the lucite or compared to the glass ceramics. So really we're keeping most of our zirconia to the very posterior, and when we are looking to use a cohesive protocol for bonding. And so that brings us to this group of nanoceramic hybrids. And this is really an interesting category. Because of how different all the materials are within this category, it's important that we actually take a look at all the different variants And I'll tell you, Grandio has quickly become one of my favorites. And I have used every single one of the materials that you see here to the left. Vita makes a very nice product called Anamic, which is really a ceramic that has a resin matrix built within it. A resin filler, I should say, excuse me. The next three that you see are actually resin bases with a ceramic filler, and in the case of Grandio, a nano-ceramic filler. And what sets Grandio so far apart from the others is the amount of filler that goes into their product. So what we see is that with the Grandio block by Voco is that this is an 86% filled material. So not only do we get enhanced strength, we get really good wear resistance, we get absolutely beautiful polishability, and we also can put a silane primer onto this product, and we're seeing enhanced bonding with this product. The other thing that has been engineered very nicely at Voco is that they've been able, with what they've put in this matrix, to establish a tooth-like elasticity and a similar coefficient of thermal expansion to natural teeth. And that is absolutely wonderful because we're getting expansion and contraction of the restorative material just as we are with the tooth structure. It also allows us to build smaller margins with less chipping. We're getting very natural aesthetics with enhanced color stability, beautiful polish retention, ease of polishing, and here's really the big kicker, is time. We are not having to fire these restorations once they come out of the milling machine. It's straight into the room, it's straight into a quick polish, and we are doing very fast, efficient, strong, reliable one-appointment dentistry. So let's talk a little bit more about this material. When we talk about the strength of the Grandio block, Grandio, of the materials that you saw here, other than the Vita Anamic, offers the best-in-class compressive strength. Now, when it comes to flexural strength, it actually exceeds the Vita Anamic, and that's because of its resin matrix with the high glass filler, with the high ceramic filler. And this is a nanoceramic particle. This is a very densely filled nanoceramic particle, so you get the best of both worlds. You're getting the polishability of a ceramic, the bondability of a ceramic, but you're getting the flexibility and the forgivability of a resin. So when we look at the amount of filler, Grandio block again is leading the rest of the pack. Again, when we make a decision in our office about which material we're going to use, I'm always going to base that decision on the science. It's got to be based on the best decision I can make, given the best information that's available to me. So when I look at the amount of filler and I see that it also contains the lowest amount of resin of any of the other resin ceramic hybrids, I say, well, what does that really do for me? What that does for me is this, is it decreases the amount of water absorption that we see with these restorations, but more importantly, it gives us a coefficient of thermal expansion that most likely resembles enamel and dentin. So if you look at this diagram, the gold line across the top here represents the coefficient of thermal expansion of enamel. The gray line is dentin, and you can see that the only other material that even approaches Grandio blocks is the Vita Anamic. And if you remember from the previous slide, what we liked about this is that having the resin matrix with the ceramic filler actually gives us a really good biaxial flexural strength that even exceeds that of the Vita Anamic. So that's the reason this has become my go-to product. Also clinically, we get a beautiful radiopacity, which is very nice for us when we're looking at our restorations after treatment is completed. But I want you to take a close look at this diagram here on the right. Take a look at the edges after grinding. This is actually a 0.6 millimeter veneer that has been milled out of Lava Ultimate, Vita Anamic, IPS Emax, and Grandio blocks. Now this is straight out of the milling machine. What I want you to look at is, because of the matrix that's involved here, we can get to thinner margins that are finished more smoothly right out of the milling machine with Grandio than we can with any of these other materials. So I think that that makes for a pretty compelling argument as to why these materials are so nice. We've all put that restorative material down over a tooth and seen that thinner margin break away. We almost never see that with this material, and so I've been very, very pleased with its performance with regard to not having chipping or breaking at the margins. So with that said, and now understanding the properties and why we would want to use a material like this, let's talk about some of the preparation considerations that have to be looked at as we prepare these. Now, first thing that you have to know is that I generally do not do inlays. Why would I do an inlay? Once the isthmus is more than 1/3 of the total buccolingual width, again, from the same study that we discussed earlier, I'm going to cover a cusp. And when I cover a cusp, I'm going to protect that tooth from cuspal flexure, and therefore I can increase the life expectancy or decrease the amount of risk to that tooth. So it is really rare that I will place an inlay in a tooth. If I require an indirect restoration, it's almost always going to be, just as you see in this picture of the inlay, we're going to go ahead and cover the functional cusp like you see here in the onlay diagram. So one of the requirements, though, is that we do have to have 1.5 millimeters of width in order for this material to have ideal strength and to come out of the milling machine ideally. But I have taken that down to 0.8 millimeters at times without a vent. And in the case of a bonded restoration like a veneer, you can at times get these margins all the way down to 1/2 millimeter, even 0.4 millimeters at a thin margin on a veneer. But please note that this is only in the case of an adhesively placed restoration, meaning these are being bonded. That is, we are going to micro etch the restorative material. We're going to use a silane primer for the ceramic filler, and we are going to adhesively place these restorations. In a cohesively placed restoration, you see these requirements under the crown here, where I would not get my margins less than 0.8 millimeters and less than 1.5 millimeters anywhere where you're going to be under occlusal load, such as an incisal edge. Okay, so we can use this material clinically for crowns. We can use it for onlays. You could use it for inlays, but as I said, very rarely do we do inlays, not to mention that the insurance reimbursement is always better for an onlay, at least in my experience it has been, than it is for an inlay. When we talk about Voco's Grandio material, we also use it over implants because it's such a forgiving material, so it almost acts as our shock absorber. Remember the flexural strength of the material. And I use it for my bite opening cases because it is so forgiving and will maintain its polishability. So here's a case where we have a tooth number 25 that was going to require a crown, and a patient was under a major time constraint. We did offer him to place an Emax crown in this case because it was in the front. He needed to be in and out of the office within an hour, and there is no way I am going to get a milled Emax crown out of there within an hour. So we elected to go with the Grandio material for this crown. And so you see the preparation. Then we come out with the crown, and what's beautiful about this material is that we do have the ability to then bond with it with a composite. So I could put a little bit of yellow stain here at the cervical, I can put a little bit of stain here at the occlusal, and we have absolutely a gorgeous restoration. I use it for almost every onlay that we do in my office, and we do a whole lot of onlays. So eventually, tooth number 4 that you see here, that will need an onlay. You can see the fracture on the distal behind this amalgam. So we know that once we come across here, we will be talking about something that is 1/3 of the buccolingual width, and we will most likely cover the functional cusp and have a nice long-lasting restoration. In this case, working on tooth number 3 that you see here, it had a large DOL amalgam, DOBL amalgam. You can see the large fracture and recurrent decay. And in this case, we wanted to go to an onlay. If you look closely, you'll see that there's a lot of healthy enamel that was left. We did not go all the way down. I only take away as much tooth structure as we need to, but I am going to cover the functional cusp. And if the buccal cusp, in this case, becomes thin, as it did here, I'm going to go ahead and cover that. If the cusp were thick, I would draw a bevel up to the point of the cusp. So we ended up going all the way around because the decay did exist on the mesial. We did have a thin wall after we removed the decay here on the buccal. So it's 360 degrees around, and many of you would say, well, by definition, isn't that a crown? And yes, actually by ADA definition, that would be a crown. In my office, we call it an onlay, though you could bill it as a crown. I don't really call it a crown until we go down to the gingival margin. So this is a lot more conservative to me than what a traditional cohesive crown would be. So what are the actual steps in doing this, in performing one of these restorations? Well, once you get your preparation designed, then we go to our capture unit, which could be a Trios or a Carestream or an iTero. In my case, it's Omnicam by Cirec. Then we're going to design it, and you may say to your laboratory, you just go ahead and take my image, design it, send me back my Grandio restoration. And these are being made in the laboratory. In fact, Dr. Kaminer and Dr. Graham, when they did their live presentation at the Greater New York Dental Meeting, that's exactly how they did it. And so the lab returned it to them. But in my office, I want these patients in and out in an hour, and we're going to give them a beautiful restoration within the hour. So then my Cirec MCXL is going to mill out my Grandio block for me. We then go to the next step, which is trying it in, looking at the occlusion. We're then going to aerobrade the inside of the crown, as you see here. We're going to put a ceramic primer inside the restoration. I'm going to aerobrade my tooth. We're going to put a bonding agent. We're going to etch any enamel that's there, and then we're going to use an adhesive protocol and do a quick final polish. So in this case, we had the failing amalgam, and here you see a nice enamel ring. This is my preparation that you see here. We're going to go through all the steps in that tooth number 3 that I just showed you. So one of the key ideals is that when you're doing an onlay procedure, you'd like to see about 1 millimeter of an enamel ring if you are doing a true adhesive procedure. We know that the long-term reliability of an etched enamel bond is very, very good. And so we don't want to just rely on dentinal bonds. We are going to also rely on this etched enamel bond. So I'm always looking for at least a 0.8 to 1 millimeter ring of enamel all the way around the tooth so that I can have a nice adhesive procedure. So this was my preparation in this case. We used our Omnicam, and there I am starting to trim the margins. We'll trim all the way around. We'll bring it all the way to the design phase. It'll show me my restoration within the Grandio block. So there's our scan and design. This is how it's going to come out of the machine. So you can see there's still dust. This is straight out, fresh out of the machine. Didn't rinse it, didn't do anything to it at this point. And the only thing I am going to do is cut the sprue at this point, and we're going to steam it so that we can try it in the mouth, look at the contacts, and then we're going to polish it up gently. And what's beautiful about these restorations, I love these ASAP polishers from Clinician's Choice. If you've never tried them, this is a strong recommendation. These are absolutely gorgeous polishers, and it's amazing the kind of luster that you can get just from this two-part system in your slow speed at about 15,000 RPM. So as I said, I like to use particle abrasion. I use the Prep Star from Danville, Zest Danville now. So we're going to air abrade the inside of the preparation. We're going to air abrade our tooth so that we can create the largest surface area for the best adhesion. We're going to put ceramic bond on the inside of the restoration. You can see the kind of luster that we've got, and that's just after two ASAP polishers, the purple and the tan. So we're going to put our ceramic bond. This is Voco ceramic bond. There are other brands that are out there of silane primer. In this case, because I'm using the Voco Grandio block, I'm staying within their system to use their adhesive protocol. So we're going to put the ceramic bond by Voco on the inside of the crown. On the tooth, we're going to use our Futura bond. This is a single dose pack. You don't have to use the single dose pack. This is very convenient though. You just press the little button that you see down here, which allows the materials to mix, and you can just puncture that with your brush applicator. You can see that I'm a selective etch kind of guy. I'm going to always etch enamel. So we're going to go around. I like using Ultra Etch. These are wedge guards from the Triadent company, Triadent Ultra Dent. And what we're going to do after we rinse our etching material away is we're going to apply this 8th generation bonding agent. So it is a self-etching primer and adhesive all in one. So we're going to rinse our etch away, then we're going to generously apply the Futura bond all over the preparation. And then we're going to air thin that after about 10 seconds. We will light cure that material at this point. We will put our Bifix QM, which is a dual cured resin cement from Voco. We're going to place that in the restoration, put it down over the preparation, and there you see where it's gone to place. And there is our final restoration. And then just removal of the flash. I like to use a 12 blade. Usually I might use an ET burr, an ET12, or an extra fine ET following the ET12. And then it's right back to those same old ASAP polishers that I absolutely adore from Clinician's Choice. So when we look at why Grandio blocks, I think it makes a compelling argument for itself. Both the flexural capabilities, the strength, the polishability. Again, I'm getting the bondability of a ceramic, but I'm getting the polishability of a ceramic as well, but I'm getting the forgivability of a resin. And that's really Just a nice combination of things to have in a indirect restorative material. But the other thing that's really important to understand is what happens once we've designed our restorative. What's going to happen? In the case of a lithium disilicate material, we're looking at about 57 to 89 minutes total to get that thing out, bonded, and polished. Where in the case of grandioblock, because there's no secondary firing required for crystallization or for sintering, we can have these out in about 30 minutes or so. And it's very common for me to do one or two of these restorations within an hour and have the patient out of the office within an hour fully bonded. That is an incredibly profitable and fun way to practice dentistry. So I do a lot of TMJ. Many of you have heard me talk about TMD and full mouth rehabilitation. I do a lot of these types of cases. So real quickly, here's a case where I had built someone up provisionally in composite material to level out the bite after they had been in a deprogramming appliance to find their best physiologic bite. So we built them up in composite material. Once I had a direct composite and had them comfortable, had it dialed in, now I can use that for my bite registration when I go to my indirect material with the CEREC restoration, with the digital restoration. And so here you see my composite buildups. That's the bite that I had established. This actually is an onlay that was done on the lower on number 19 and 20 in this case. And here we go. You can see here's number 12 and number 13. Number 14 is still in the composite material, in my provisional composite material. But I went ahead and prepared these for onlays. And because I used the bite registration from the composites I had already done, I had the bite already dialed in. I designed my onlays to specifications that would look exactly the way I wanted the teeth to look, but be in the bite I wanted them to be in. And so we were able to get 2 of those done in an hour, and then finally came back and did the third on tooth number 14, and that was the final result. So you can see that this is such a versatile material. You can also see, because of the flexibility, because of how forgiving it is, because of the elasticity, that this is also a wonderful material to place over implants. And because of the amount of ceramic filler in it, it's going to maintain its polishability absolutely beautifully with time. As I said, I love to come back at these after I've luted them, come back with a number 12 blade. That's how I get my really, really fine and smooth margins, is with that 12 blade. You can also come in with an ET burr, ET6, ET12, something like that, ET extra fine, if you will. And then just my ASAP polishers. And look at the luster on this. I mean, it's really hard to find that even in a ceramic material, nonetheless a nano ceramic hybrid like what we're dealing with. So this is my little saying, but I fully believe this, and that's why we use so much of this grandioblock in my practice. But when combined with the ease of shade matching and the polishability of a true ceramic, grandioblocs have made one-appointment dentistry more predictable, more profitable, and more fun. And this is fun. It is. This is a great way to practice dentistry. You know, if I do 2 of these in an hour, 3 of these in an hour and 10 minutes, you know, billing out $3,000, $3,300, depending on where you are, that's really a very, very productive time. And it's doing the kind of dentistry that our patients want. It's reducing risk for our patients. So it's really a win-win-win. Everybody enjoys doing this kind of dentistry. So with that, we are coming to the end of our hour. If you've liked what you've heard or you'd like to hear more from Catapult Education, feel free to visit us on catapulteducation.com. We are starting our Catapult Live Symposia and our Catapult Live Continuum this year, so be looking for that. Feel free to email me at jhorowitzdmd@gmail.com, and I will leave you with this one last thought, and that is that your beliefs don't make you a better person, your behavior does. And so with that, I will say thank you. I will open it up to any questions, and so feel free to throw some questions at me. I'll be here for the next 10 minutes or so answering those. Okay, I am not seeing any questions at this point. I will give it another couple of minutes. While I am waiting, I will also say that I'd like to thank Voco America for sponsoring this. I'd like to thank Viva Learning for the opportunity again to present, and I wish you all a good evening. I will stay on for the next minute or so in case anybody wants to ask a question. And then if I don't see any in the next minute, I will go ahead and sign off. Okay, there was one question asking about the which cusps were reduced, and I think you went back and took a look. So I think that question has remedied itself. How does this material compare with Cristobal, which was a much higher resin content material? I actually used a bunch of Cristobal back when I was using Americus Labs. And Cristobal was a great material, but it did not maintain its polishability like this material does. There is a much, much higher ceramic content in this material. In fact, this is 86% filler. You will really enjoy the polish, and not just the initial polish, but how well it maintains its polish afterwards. So you'll get the same forgivability that you had with your Cristobal, but you should see better bondability as you'll be able to silinate this product, and you should also see better maintenance of the polish. A question came in about our live courses. We have a live symposium coming up in Nashville. That's coming up May the 10th. If you go to catapulteducation.com, you can get more information about that. What do we use to retract the cheek? We retract the cheeks either with I like dry tips. Those are from Microcopy. Those are really nice products. I call them mouth diapers. There's some other real nice products. Ivoclar makes a really nice product as well for retraction. The name is escaping me right now, but if you look under Ivoclar, they make a beautiful cheek retraction device as well. Question came in, is Procera a lucite? No, Procera is actually an aluminum oxide, where now we're using zirconium oxide. So not really using a lot of Procera anymore, not seeing as much of that. Getting a lot of thank yous. I really appreciate that. I thank you for all listening. And let's see, what else do we have? What indication would you not use the Voco block for? I will say you can use it for almost anything, particularly on if I'm in a really highly aesthetic area, most of my veneer applications, most of my anterior crowns, I'm still leaning towards Emax. I mean, it's hard to deny the beauty of a true ceramic and the true translucency of ceramic. So I'm leaning more towards Emax, you know, for my anterior crowns. I'm leaning more towards full coverage zirconia, say on second molars where I need incredible strength. But the thing about zirconia is I always want to make sure that I have the ability to cohesively cement the restoration, meaning I want to have 4 millimeters of axial wall all the way around the tooth. I want to have no more than a 4 to 6 degree taper on the restoration, meaning that there's going to be good retention, because we know with zirconia that there are difficulties using adhesive protocols. So if I'm thinking at all in terms of an adhesive protocol, I'm leaning more towards the Grandio block. What else do we have? Let's see. Thank you for all the questions. I'm excited. Now I know some people actually listened. The initial investment required for Grandio. Actually, there is 0 investment required for Grandio. The reason is because you can take a traditional impression, send it to your laboratory, and ask for a Grandio restoration. So that is 0 investment to you. Or if you have simply digital capturing ability, so if you're doing imaging at your office, say if you have the CareStream or the iTero or the Trios, you can image that and then send that directly to your laboratory where they can mill this out for you. Or you may decide to get into milling technology, and many companies are making milling units now. So I wouldn't tell you that you have to get the CEREC like I have. That's an investment that I had already made. I will tell you that for the capture and milling, it's typically a little over $100,000 to put both of those in your office, but you don't have to invest in any of it, and you can still use this wonderful material. So yeah, that's great. You have a lot of options there. Let's see what else. Longevity of a milled restoration versus lab fabrication. So it depends. Is the lab milling your restoration, or is the lab pressing your restoration? I will tell you that an Emax pressed restoration is going to be more durable than an Emax milled restoration is going to be. It's going to have a higher strength to it. In the case of this material, this is only available as a milled restorative. But remember, Voco also makes a Grandio composite, which is in its category of Ormocare restorative. So they make a beautiful composite material for your direct restorations. It's also beautifully compatible with the Grandio block. So if you wanted to add material to it, you have the ability to fix these at any time. So what else do we have? Is it okay to prime the tooth with a fluoride? I would not recommend that before any bonding protocol, or anti-sensitivity agent, which I do not have a problem with, whether it be benzalkonium chloride. That's certainly okay. I know that there are some people who like to use HEMA agents. Just make sure that you're following the directions for use with any bonding protocol. But no, you shouldn't have any issues using some of the desensitizing agents. Just be careful. Definitely putting a fluoride on the tooth will definitely impact your bond strength. So I would not recommend that, although many of the HEMA agents are absolutely fine. Let's see, what else do we have? Is there a quiz? Yes, there are some questions you'll need to take for your CE, and that's there. And then, is it billed as a ceramic? This is able to be billed as a ceramic. It is 86% filled with a nano ceramic material. So yes, this can be billed as a ceramic restoration. And I think that's about it. We're down to 8 seconds. So I think we're going to call that a night. Thanks again for your time, and wish you all the best on this Tuesday night. Take care now.